All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our webinar on the evolving role of school counselors in U.S. schools. Here at the George Washington University's Graduate School of Education and Human Development, we are lucky to have faculty who study the many complexities within education and counseling from various angles. In this series, we are excited to bring you webinars looking at the U.S. teacher shortage from viewpoints including educators, administrators, policymakers, and counselors. Today, we have Dr. Mary DeRaedt with us, and she will be speaking about the role of school counselors within the U.S. teacher shortage. Dr. DeRaedt is the program director for our school counseling master's program, and she's also an assistant professor of counseling and human development. After Dr. DeRaedt's talk, we will invite you to stay for a short Q&A, and as she presents, please feel free to go ahead and type questions in the chat box. Dr. DeRaedt, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's great to be here, and I just want to thank the Graduate School of Education and Human Development Admissions for inviting me, because this is a really important topic, and I think that it isn't getting enough attention in our when we're looking at schools. And so I'm really excited to be in a position where I can come and speak about the challenges and the potential of what's going on in our schools when it comes to the school counseling field. One of the things I wanted to start with, though, is the role of mental health in children. And it's important for us to all have a little bit of context, as school counselors are there to help children with their emotions and with their mental health. We need to kind of understand the problem as it stands right now. And believe it or not, this problem starts prior to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, local agencies and governmental agencies were already tracking a decline in student mental health. As it says on the slide here, the suicide rates had gone up by 76% in 2005 and between 2005 and 2017. And it tripled for children aged 10 to 14. I think I put that stat on there because what we have to recognize is that there is a mental health crisis. And I know in my field, I've heard that term kind of thrown around, but think about that stat. Prior to the pandemic, suicide rates in adolescents and children had increased. I have over the last, they've increased exponentially, actually. Over the last few years, I have started in my own practice and in my work with schools, I have started to hear parents bringing children to counseling for suicidality as young as 5, 6, 8. Prior to the last 15 years, that was almost unheard of, at least in my practice, and I've been a therapist for 20 years. So I think that what we have is a crisis with children. Prior to 2005, the suicide rate had been stable. So I think that we can definitely say that mental health is being impacted and is decreasing for children across our nation. Increased evidence of depression since the pandemic, that has also risen exponentially. Anxiety in multiple forms, things like social anxiety and separation anxiety, all of these aspects of this kind of normal human reaction, which is anxiety, are kind of spiked for children because of the instability they've been experiencing. And we'll get into some of the reasons why in a minute, but it is, I think there's just no way around it. It is a challenge that is impacting teachers, it is impacting schools, it is impacting parents, and it says something really important about what we need to help the next generation, because all of these kids are in school now, but they are going to be getting out of school And what are we going to equip them with? What are they going to be ready to cope with when they graduate from school? So this is an important time and an important point in history to really understand what's going on. And one of the values of a school counselor is that as their role is to focus on mental health, they have more freedom to really explore and understand and try to make sense of some of the things that are happening in schools socio-emotionally and from a mental health perspective for children, whereas teachers have that added role of obviously teaching and then also trying to help the students with their mental health on a day-to-day basis. So I think school counselors are uniquely placed to do research. I know in the school counseling program here at GW, we require students to do action research in their second year, where they are looking at issues that are facing the schools they're in. And that's a really important skill that counselors are able to do. And we want to encourage them to do more of that and to feel more comfortable doing it, because we need to understand what's going on. We need to understand how to move out of it as well. Post-pandemic, children are facing quite a few more challenges because of the online schooling that they did. For some children, it was effective. For others, it was not. But even if it was effective for learning purposes, those children were still isolated. I'm going to kind of go over the bottom four first. Instability, fear, grief, and isolation. These are all the outcomes of some of the COVID lockdowns that we experienced in this country. Children who were not able to interact with their friends. And while video chats and video connection, I think, contrary to some people I know who feel like video connection isn't all that personable or engaging, I do think that there's a value to it. And I really, really think that having that video technology mitigated some of the more severe outcomes that could have happened, even given what we're dealing with now. But even with that ability, children are grieving the loss of 2 years of their lives that they didn't even know what they missed. They are grieving the loss of the massive aspects of our population who died during this pandemic. So many children lost grandparents, family members, parents, siblings even. So we have a generation of grieving children who are back in our schools full time and trying to make sense of the world that they are now being handed, which is a completely different world than the one that they were in 2 years ago. So schools are in a unique position because now these children are with them 6 hours a day. They are trying to approach it from a pre-pandemic perspective, but the truth is that that pre-pandemic perspective isn't going to work for the place that we are now. And we need to rethink how we are providing services in schools, how we are approaching education. Something that's not on the slide, but we'll get into later, is that one of my areas of expertise is trauma-informed schools. And so I think at this point in history, given what we know about the neuroscience of trauma and the subjective nature of trauma, we have an entire generation of students with trauma who are back in schools and trying to cope with that. Add to it something that I know we hear a lot about, oh, social media is horrible, it's so bad. But I don't think social media is so bad. I think that social media is so new that we as a culture haven't had a chance to really make sense of and train children appropriately in how to use it. And so we are dealing with some of the outcomes of children who, for a 2 year prior to the pandemic, they didn't understand how to navigate it. They didn't know how to live in this kind of global world, even as young children. And now they have relied upon it for 2 years, which has made it even more a lifeline for them. And yet it's a lifeline that is a double-edged sword. And so I think we really need to explore even more heavily the negative impacts of children of social media, and also add to that, what are the positives and how do we as a culture and as a school limit access to phones and social media during the school hours, and yet also make use of technology and make use of some of these platforms to maintain connection and maintain closeness. Another thing is the rising poverty rates. So across our country, the pandemic had a massive impact on the rates of poverty, and actually just the rates of poverty have been going up. So we have students who are living in conditions that are increasingly more challenging to navigate. And what I can tell you is that consistently across time, one of the number one challenges for children in success in schools is poverty. And I say that given the context of many people have already heard of Maslow, and he has some problematic concepts, but generally speaking, the idea that his concept that if you do not know where your next meal is coming from, you do not know if you're going to have to be sleeping in your car or moving all of your clothes into a new shelter tonight, or maybe having to leave your house and move in with a grandparent or a family member. If you have complete and utter instability in your life, you are not able to find a place where you can access your prefrontal cortex in a way that helps you actually learn content. And so addressing issues of poverty is something that we really need to think about in terms of how the role the school can play in that. But the role the school counselor can play in that is they can be much more able to recognize when that's happening. They can be in touch with teachers who are seeing the day-to-day impacts of that on their students and be equipping them. They can be connecting students to resources, connecting students' families to resources outside of schools. So there is a role that school counselors can play. And then academic pressure. There is a push-pull in our schools. And this is my opinion here, but I think that there is a push-pull that says we really need high achieving, we need success. The US is falling behind in many ways in terms of some of our markers of increasing skill in education. We want to promote STEM. We want students who are capable. But in the meantime, we are pressuring students in a way that has not been there to this extent in the past. In the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, children were going to kindergarten, and yes, maybe they were learning they were learning their alphabet, they were learning their shapes, but there wasn't this expectation that you have to do homework in kindergarten, you have to be studying in kindergarten, you have to be, there was much more of a preschool exploratory approach. And we are moving away from that across time, and we are putting more and more impact or effort into homework and work outside of school. And we need to really think about the impact of that on mental health, because children are born to play. They are born to learn through play. There is evidence across the board that a child who is handed something new and allowed to play with it, engage in it, think about it, explore it on their own with minimal adult interaction, will learn through that play more quickly because it's their natural way of learning. And so one of the things about trauma-informed schools is finding ways to incorporate a more playful mindset into our schools, which will reduce that academic pressure and encourage students to learn from more of a natural perspective, a natural standpoint. So all of these things are contributing to schools that in our current state have children who are increasingly having emotional outbursts. They are increasingly having more violent emotional reactions. There's increasing altercations in schools. There is increasing distraction and inability to complete work, and teachers who are struggling to get students to engage. It is a challenging time, but as I'm going to kind of talk about in my last slide, it's also an amazing time for us to rethink a system that has been going on for 100 years, over 100 years, and see if there's something we can do to change that system now. And I think that is why getting students into the education departments, getting students in to train them to be teachers, to train them to be school counselors, is probably one of the most important things that our country can do right now to make a difference, even 10, 20 years from now. And in the interviews that I've been doing with students, I often say, you know, you are the generation that is going to get in here and do something new and innovate. And so I think all of these things, instead of kind of feeling their weight and taking that on as a negative thing, I think we need to take it in and say, this is something we can do something about. We just need to think through it a different way. One of the things, though, that as this kind of series has focused on teacher shortages and shortages, is that we have a shortage of school counselors in this country. Not only do we have a shortage, but we have what I would consider to be outdated ratios of student to counselor expectations. And there are multiple maps that you can look at online. These maps will show you that district by district, even though we still have pretty high ratio to school counselor to student ratios, most schools in the United States, by far, there are only, I think, maybe 10 or 15 districts, maybe a few more than that, but there are very few districts in this country that actually have the staff to meet their expected ratios at the state they are now. And so, you know, according to federal government data and the National Center for Education Statistics, we are low on school counselors. Very few people are meeting that ratio. And it has gotten progressively worse since the pandemic. During the pandemic, there was a large portion of school counselors who retired. And it makes sense to me. At the time, when the pandemic hit, there were quite a few school counselors who were on the precipice of potentially retiring or not retiring. And then what happens? We have an illness that could potentially kill them by going to school. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, there was quite a few school counselors who said, I can't do this anymore. This is the time. This is my sign. I'm going to retire. So there were mass retirings of school counselors throughout the first year or so of the pandemic, which dropped the ratios significantly. Add to that there were a large number of school counselors who realized the increasing effort and role they were having to play without any kind of rethinking of that. So they went from being one of two school counselors in the school to being the only school counselor in a school. And so COVID-19 put a massive burden on the school counselors that were still working in the schools when students started to return. And so a lot of those school counselors decided to transition into private practice, decided to kind of move into another role. And so there was another kind of wave of people quitting the school counseling field. And so what that leaves us with is a period in history where we have a massive need for school counselors. I have been talking to different heads of districts and different school systems and teachers. And what I know for a fact and what is just a truth right now, when you get into the school counseling field, when you start a school counseling master's degree, you have almost guaranteed employment post-graduation. This need is impacting across our nation. And so what we want to see is people who are coming in, who are ready to address the need, who are ready to take the jobs that are now waiting for them, and who are kind of capable of recognizing the importance of maybe rethinking how we're doing school counseling to some extent, maybe have an excitement for that, which the future, my final slide. I think that what we need to think about, and what people who are in the school counseling field now or who are thinking of joining it really kind of need to engage in, is where do we go from here? How do we take what we've been handed and turn it into something valuable? One of the things that I talk about when I'm talking about trauma education is a metaphor that I love, which is that trauma is kind of like someone handed you raw chicken and you had never seen it before and you didn't know what it was. And it seems slimy and gross and you don't know what to do with it. And trauma is when we kind of throw it away or throw it in the back of a refrigerator and ignore it for a while, and it starts to mold and have a problem. But what I feel like, let me finish that. The process then is to recover from trauma is to pull that out, clean it off, scrub out the refrigerator, take that leftover chicken and figure out what to do with it. Do you put it in the compost pile to make it have value? Do you freeze it again as a reminder of the work that you did? What do you do with it? Because we need to make meaning and we need to make something positive of these traumatic experiences. And what I feel like right now is that the school counseling field is in that space of, we've been handed raw chicken right now. We've been handed something that we weren't prepared for and that we didn't know what it was, and we're not sure, but we need people who can come in and help us figure out how to take that kind of potentially challenging situation and turn it into an amazing meal of the most delicious chicken you've ever had in your life, and turn our school system into something that is really addressing the needs of students. So that means school counselors in the future, they already play a role in shaping the school culture, but how can we empower them to use their knowledge of counseling skills and mental health focus? Every counselor that's joining schools now should be trained in things like diagnosis and therapy. And so they have a broader spectrum of skill set that they are bringing in. We actually have at GW a postmaster certificate that is for often counselors who are in schools now coming back to get some of those classes that kind of make them more equipped to deal with serious mental illness that is happening in schools. So how do we rethink that? There are already schools that are bringing in counselors to do therapy one-on-one in schools. There are schools that are bringing in counselors to do play therapy and have literal play therapy rooms in their school for children to get out of their classrooms shortly and come in and do a play therapy session during the day. So we're starting to rethink, what is this role? And we're starting to equip students to be prepared for that role, to just change the culture, to teach emotional regulation. What is at the core of some of the challenges we have right now with students is that they don't know how to regulate their emotional state. In many ways, and my students will know this is one of my soapboxes, but in many ways, students have just been told, have your feelings, it's okay. But we didn't tell them, okay, now what do we do with our feelings? Once we're having them, what do we do with them? Where do we put them? How do we use them? How do we understand their boundaries and their limitations? How do we understand that feelings are just one source of information about our experience and kind of put them in that space. And so we need school counselors who can come into schools and not only teach children and adolescents how to emotionally regulate, but can teach teachers how to emotionally regulate and teach teachers how to teach students and reinforce what they're learning about emotion regulation. Instead of ignoring them or indulging them too much, we need to find that middle ground. And then teacher support. This is something that I have advocated for as long, I was in my master's program in 20 some years ago. And I, as a former teacher myself for many years, I believe that there is a role for school counselors to provide support to teachers. What that support looks like, how involved it is, whether we have a counselor on staff in schools to do therapy on a daily basis for teachers or not, whether that just means added psychoeducation meetings for teachers, whatever it is, we need to think about how school counselors can be there and be present and be engaged with the teachers in the schools in a way that is a transfer of some of their skills and knowledge to be more effective in our support. Another really amazing bonus when you're thinking about the future of being in a school counseling program is that all counseling programs require you to learn these skills yourself. So when we have school counselors coming into schools where we have trained them in how to manage their own emotions, how to understand their own experience, how to recognize and treat, not treat their own trauma, but recognize and treat the trauma, seek out the services, know what is effective to manage your own emotional state. And so I have always said that one of the greatest things about being in a counseling program that I am grateful for to this day is that it made me unflinchingly look at my own experience, and it improved my personal mental health by leaps and bounds. So it is an amazing opportunity for anyone to, even if you're a teacher and you're thinking of transitioning, this is just an added bonus to becoming a school counselor at this period of time and just at any point in time, really. And then the potential impact. So right now we have a limited amount of school counselors, but if we can increase the number of school counselors in schools, when children, the prime and most important time from a developmental perspective, which is really the only perspective that works, might be controversial to say that, but I'm still going to say it. From a developmental perspective, if we can make a difference in the lives of the children that are in schools right now, from a mental health perspective, helping them learn to cope, helping them understand their emotional responding, helping them learn coping skills for academic environments, for home environments, for social environments. If we can have this impact now, we are going to have a generation of people who are graduating from our schools in 10, 12, 13 years, who are much more stable citizens, who have reduced outcomes of depression and anxiety. We can reduce the suicide rates. We can change the course of this world, really, but this country and this nation by helping the children that we have in our care. And so I think that when we look across the spectrum of how do we change the future, we change the future by helping the children who are in schools now. And so I think that that is the actual outcome, the impact that we have as school counselors is so much bigger than almost any other thing that we can do as a country. And what we're doing, and my last statement there, is that it's creating a solid foundation. We have had good schools in the United States for generations, and we have put out students who have been intelligent and capable and skilled, and they have brought us to a precipice of technology that is unheard of in the last 30 years. And yet we have not addressed the emotional needs of children as directly as we have the educational. So if we can find a way to connect and balance the role of the teacher and the school counselor and the school, where everyone is equally invested in academic and emotional learning and growth and support for children, I think that we can have a much higher impact on positive mental health outcomes in the long run for our schools. And we can actually turn around this trajectory that we are, this downward trajectory, because we are on a downward trajectory right now for mental health. And there is a tendency to say, oh, well, if you have anxiety, if you have depression, if you're feeling this is, you're stuck with it, you're going to have it your whole life. That is not the truth, according to neuroscience and biology. We can heal depression. We can heal anxiety that's pathological. We all have anxiety. You can't escape it, but we can heal pathological anxiety. We can heal a lot of these conditions and help students become strong, capable, functioning, happy adults. We just have to invest now. So I thank you all for listening to me, and I am open to any questions, and I will answer to the best of my ability.
Thanks so much, Dr. DeRaedt, for your very informative presentation and talk. We'll start a short Q&A right now. So for those of you in the audience, please go ahead and type any questions you have into the chat bar within the Zoom meeting. I see one of our staff just showed you where that is. So feel free to type in questions there. But we actually have a few questions already. So I'm just going to start there, Dr. DeRaedt, and I'll start reading them off to you. So our first question is, how does the decline of children's mental health affect teachers in the classroom? So in particular, for someone, for example, who's looking into going to be a K through 12 teacher, what should they expect in their classroom? How would this affect the classroom?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. Because as I said, as a former teacher, honestly, as a former teacher, the reason I became a counselor is because I was noticing the mental health impact on my students. And this was 20 years ago. And I was like, I'm not equipped to deal with mental health issues. I need to go back and get another degree. So what we are seeing in schools is that teachers are now having to navigate larger kind of emotional upset in students, much higher rates of inattention, not because we're having higher rates of ADHD, but because when you are anxious and when you are hypervigilant as a child, you are constantly scanning, checking, looking around you to make sure your environment is safe. You can't focus on school. So we are having increasing rates of inattention, increasing rates of activity. I don't want to call it hyperactivity because, again, that seems to imply it's ADHD. This is not an increase in ADHD symptoms. This is an outcome of hypervigilant students who are unsure and aren't trusting their environment, which reduces the ability of students to take in the learning. So, concrete example, if I am trying to learn borrowing in subtraction, which I don't know, maybe they don't do borrowing anymore, but if I'm trying to learn a specific skill in math and I am constantly on edge and my body is activated and my parasympathetic nervous system and my nervous system are pumping my heart, and I am not able to then I am going to learn about a third of what you put in front of me. And so teachers are facing students who are learning less in the same amount of time, who are struggling to be still in the classroom, who are struggling to feel safe in the classroom. And so one of the things that I've really been considering, and I would like to look at this more specifically, but is that behavior management plans we have a traditional understanding of behavior management, which is very Pavlovian in terms of do good, here's the sticker, do bad, here's a bad outcome. But I think we're going to have to help teachers navigate rethinking their behavior management systems in their classrooms and redefining what we think is reactionary worthy behavior and helping teachers navigate the frustration that comes with recognizing maybe I have to teach less in this amount of time with the intent that they will take more home over time, instead of trying to cram as much in as possible in the little time they have during the day. I am not sure the long-term implications for some of that in terms of what we expect on a yearly basis, and maybe it's short-term, but I do think that that can impact teachers intensely. I also think, and it's why I talked a little bit about why we need school counselors for teachers. Teachers have been impacted by the pandemic. Teachers have been in a state of chaos and instability for 2 years. Teachers have not known whether they had to go to work or they're going to do it online, or their families, their children were struggling. Their relationships were impacted. Their families, they are grieving. They have experienced loss, and they're also still trying to go in and carry the weight of the emotional burden of these many, many students in their classroom every day. They need support. They need somewhere to go talk to. So they need someone to go talk to who can empathize and understand and give them ways of addressing their own trauma, their own reactions, their own responses. Because if you're hypervigilant, if you're on edge, and then your students are on edge, then you are less able to cope with the things that are happening in your classroom. So I think it's a two-pronged approach in my mind. One is helping teachers understand what mental health problems look like, first of all, and helping them understand the difference between an anxiety inattention and an ADHD inattention, which is a big one. Helping them recognize the importance of calming activities, grounding activities, things that help the students focus and help them feel safe, so that they can structure their lessons in a way that has a much higher outcome of learning for their students.
That makes a lot of sense. Another question that just came in is actually very related. Can some of the mental health issues children are facing be addressed in the classroom, I think, rather than relying just on school counselors?
Yes, I think that, and I want to just acknowledge that right now, if there's any teachers listening, there's going to be a feeling like we're already trying to teach them. So I want to make something very clear. I don't think that we need to put the burden of helping students on teachers, because sometimes that's how that question can get interpreted, as the outcome is, oh yeah, we need to make teachers responsible for their emotional health. That's not, I think, the way that we need to go. But I think that what we can do is we can, like I was saying in the last, to the last question, if we teach educators how to recognize the signs and symptoms of things like depression, anxiety, dissociation. So dissociation is a natural occurring response in children. It is when they're fantasy playing, when they're playing, their whole way of playing is by checking out of now and living in a fantasy world where they can learn and explore things that they couldn't do in the real world. And so, but what happens is when they have severe anxiety or depression, they will overuse that dissociative response and sometimes look like they're not paying attention, sometimes not look like they're learning, like they have maybe a learning disability, when really it's just that they are not present. And so one of the things that I usually teach when I am talking to teachers about trauma is recognizing the multiple symptoms of a dissociative response in a child when you see it. And then how do you then address it? If I think that just learning that, teachers feel, from the feedback I've gotten from teachers, they feel so much more empathetic for their students. They feel so much more equipped to not just be the person who's like, oh, don't do that. You need to listen, pay attention. They're taking a moment and going, squatting down at the student's level, looking them in the eye or not, helping them do a grounding activity that takes 2 seconds and they see the change. So I think things like that, equipping teachers to recognize mental health issues and giving them quick, solution-focused and grounding technique behaviors to help them address it that don't change the course of the day could actually help them impact student mental health during the course. And it's kind of nice for them. I know a teacher who every morning she starts her day with the students in the room. They all do a grounding activity every day where they kind of focus on their breath, calm down, focus on their school day, think about positive things that could happen during that day. And then they start the day. It takes 5 minutes and the students learn a lot more. So I think things like that, if we kind of combine this training about mental health with teachers, I think they are so creative and so smart and so capable of knowing the way kids work and knowing the way children's minds work, that if we equip them with this information, the teachers are going to go wild with amazing things they could do in their classrooms that would address the mental health issues and help the students learn better. I think we just need to get them this information. I hope that makes sense.
I hope so too. Yes, thanks. Another question is, what are some of the other career prospects for school counselors within the field of mental health? So for example, are there other positions available that if someone did get a degree in school counseling, they wouldn't need an additional degree or certificate on top of that in order to move on to that position?
Yes. So when you get a school counseling degree, as long as your school counseling degree is the 60 credit school counseling degree master's, when you graduate, you are eligible to apply to be a certified school counselor first, but also to begin the process to become a licensed professional counselor, an LPC. So once that's a process, it's a 2-year process, but you can become a working licensed graduate professional counselor right upon graduation, which means you can do any job that an LPC can do. You can see clients, you can work in a community mental health environment, you can work in a public health sphere, you can start your own private practice. There are many other things that you could do with that. You could do trainings. You can, I've known a couple different professionals who graduated from the school counseling program and were school counselors for a couple of years and then moved into a training space where they were going around to different schools and different communities and training people in mental health concepts and topics. So there are quite a few. There is also career counseling. And so when you take career counseling as a school counselor, it is one of the things that we focus on because we want students to be career-minded. There is a National Council for Career Development, and you can become certified through that council after graduation and become a career counselor, which opens the door to a lot of different environments, including business environments, government environments, things like that. And then also one of the things that is unique to the GW program, I'm not sure which other master's in school counseling programs offer this, but we offer play therapy classes, which when you take a play therapy class in your master's program, you are equipped to kind of get started applying for your Association of Play Therapy registered play therapist title, which you can then be a registered play therapist and provide play therapy in multiple environments, in all these different environments. So there's a lot of, it is a broad field. And like I've said in my talk, like there are multiple ways in which this field is currently expanding. And we are starting to get an understanding of new ways in which we need to address mental health. So it's ever expanding, but I hope maybe I covered a few of the things that you could do.
Absolutely. So we'll do 2 more questions, this one and one more. Can you give an example of an action research project that students have done in the school counseling program?
Yes, now that's a challenge. I have to think through some of them. I know that a couple of students have done action research projects looking at the the lived experience of Black adolescents in their high school, and looked at the issues that those adolescents are facing from a diversity perspective. I have seen students work on looking at the impact of attendance on grades. Students, if they have reduced attendance, what is the impact of that long-term on grading and grades for the student? Students have also run groups. So realize that maybe their school needed a group for LGBTQ plus students to process and explore their experience and address coping skills for depression. And so they will create a group to meet the need and do a pre and post test to see the outcome of that group and if it had an impact for that school and that environment. I'm trying to think of others that sometimes people have taken target students in the schools and looked at the impact of that student being provided individual therapy or individual sessions with the school counselor throughout the semester and seeing the impact of that. I think I could go on. There are so many different things that they're looking at, everything from taking records and looking at the impact of some of the different policies and procedures that are going on in the schools to looking at socio-emotional issues and how are we addressing them and how can we impact them. So I know right now, the new school counselors who are looking at graduating in the spring are getting ready to kind of implement their projects now. And so I will have more information after our research conference where they present it in April.
That's exciting. All right, our last question is, what would you recommend for someone interested in going into school counseling? Are there experiences before starting a master's degree that might be helpful?
Yeah. So obviously the baseline, you need an undergrad degree. I will say that having an undergraduate degree that is either in education or in psychology is really useful. We have admitted students who, sorry, I almost had to sneeze. We have admitted, I'm so sorry. We have admitted students who have degrees in other things though, but having experience working with children in some capacity, having volunteered at a camp or worked in a school environment is really useful because it gives you a foundation on which to kind of base the education that we're giving you. I generally see people come in with either education or psychology, and I like that mix because what we're doing is a combination of education and psychology. So those students kind of can bounce off each other. I also feel like one of the important characteristics of being a counselor in general is being someone who is curious about the human mind and curious about the human experience and really wants to understand what themselves and is open to exploring their own challenges as well as helping other people. So I think that having that added layer of cognitive curiosity is an important part of someone who is coming into a school counseling program. That and the ability to just enjoy children, because not all of us have that skill. And I don't think we all have to, but if you're going to be a school counselor, I think you need to have some area that you are interested in, age group, I should say, that you are interested in, and that you really like to talk to. I used to think as a former first and second grade teacher that I only ever wanted to talk to little kids. And then I got into counseling and realized teenagers are cool. I really like them. They're fun to talk to and they're interesting. And so, now I do a lot of adolescent therapy because I like talking to teenagers. So I think having that enjoyment and desire to talk to and engage with children is a really important part of being a school counselor as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. DeRaedt, and also to our audience for your attention on this critical topic. If you are interested in learning more about the training that GW offers for school counseling teachers and administrators, please feel free to reach out to our admission office, and I put some contact information there in the chat for you. We also hope to see you join us at future admission events and webinars, and you can find information on those on our website under admissions events. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. It was lovely to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.